A frozen woman clutched a silver key in the middle of a blizzard, and the moment the rancher saw what she refused to let go of, he knew this was no ordinary rescue. Snow slammed against Ethan Brooks's face as he dropped to one knee beside the overturned wagon. The woman wasn't moving. Her fingers were stiff with cold, yet they were locked around a worn leather bag so tightly he couldn't pry it loose. Wind howled across Snowcap Ridge. A loose wheel creaked somewhere in the white darkness. Then, for just a second, her eyes opened, and she whispered a single word before falling silent again. Ethan had no idea that word would pull him into a secret buried far beyond Frost Valley. Before we ride into this story, tell me where you're watching from and join us for more unforgettable Western tales. Chapter: The Woman in the Snow. The storm came down from Snowcap Ridge before sunset. 1 hour earlier, the sky above Frost Valley had been clear enough to see the distant peaks. By late afternoon, the mountains had vanished behind a wall of white. Ethan Brooks pulled the collar of his wool coat higher and guided the last of his cattle through the south gate of Broken Creek Ranch. The wind pushed hard against the fence line. Snow blew sideways across the pasture. "Come on," he muttered to the lead steer. The animal disappeared into the barnyard. Ethan swung the gate shut and wrapped the chain around the post. His gloves were already stiff with ice. Most men in Frost Valley would have stayed inside by now. Ethan never trusted winter storms, not since 6 years ago. He turned toward the house when something caught his eye beyond the ridge road. A shape, dark against the snow. At first he thought it was a fallen branch. Then he saw a wheel, a wagon, half overturned near the ditch. His jaw tightened. No wagon should have been out there this late. The wind howled across the valley. For a moment he considered leaving it. The storm was worsening by the minute. Then he saw movement. Barely. Something beside the wagon. Someone. Ethan grabbed a lantern from the barn wall and headed into the storm. Snow struck his face like handfuls of sand. His boots sank deep with every step. The wagon appeared and disappeared behind curtains of white. When he finally reached it, one horse was gone. The traces hung loose and broken. The wagon itself had rolled onto one side. Beside it lay a woman. She wasn't moving. Snow had gathered across her coat and shoulders. Ethan dropped to one knee. "Ma'am?" No answer. He brushed snow from her face. Young, maybe 25. Maybe younger. Her skin had gone pale from the cold. A small leather bag was clutched tightly against her chest. Even unconscious, she hadn't let go of it. Ethan checked for a pulse. There. Weak. But there, well, he said quietly. "Looks like you're coming home with me." The trip back felt twice as long. He wrapped her in 2 blankets from the wagon and lifted her across his horse. The storm erased their tracks almost immediately. By the time Broken Creek Ranch appeared through the snow, darkness had settled over Frost Valley. Inside the house, warmth returned slowly. The wood stove crackled. Coffee simmered in a blackened pot. Ethan placed the woman in the spare room that had not been used in years. He added another log to the fire. Then he noticed the leather bag still hanging from her shoulder. For a long moment, he simply stared at it. Finally, he set it on the table. He wasn't a man who searched through other people's belongings. But if she was hurt, there might be identification. Something that could tell him who she was. He loosened the strap. Inside, he found only 3 things: a silver key, an old photograph, and half of a torn document. Nothing else. No money, no letters, no ticket, no name. The photograph showed a man standing beside a mine entrance. The image was faded and cracked along one edge. Ethan turned it over. Nothing written on the back. The document was worse. Half the page was missing. Only fragments of words remained. Ownership. Company. Witness. The rest had been torn away. The silver key was heavier than it looked. A number had been engraved into the metal. Ethan frowned. then carefully returned everything to the bag. The woman slept through the night. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the old ranch house settled and creaked. Near midnight, Ethan heard movement, a floorboard. He stepped into the hallway. The spare room door stood open. The woman was awake. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket. The lamplight touched her face. Her eyes immediately found him. Calm eyes, alert eyes, not the eyes of someone confused after nearly freezing to death. "You should be resting," Ethan said. She studied him for a second, then nodded once. "Thank you." Her voice was rough from the cold. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "I'm Ethan Brooks." A small pause followed. "Violet." "Nothing more." "Just Violet." "No last name?" Her fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. "Just Violet." The answer settled between them. Ethan did not press. People carried secrets west every day. Some escaped debts. Some escaped grief. Some escaped things they never talked about. He understood that better than most. "You hungry?" A faint nod. 10 minutes later, she sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of stew and a cup of coffee. The storm rattled the windows. The lamp cast soft gold across the room. Neither spoke much. But Ethan noticed something. Every time the house creaked, Violet looked toward the correct side of the building. Every time the wind shifted, her eyes moved toward the proper window, as though she already knew the layout, as though she had lived there before. Hours later, after she returned upstairs, Ethan stepped outside one last time to check the barn. The storm had weakened. The valley lay silent beneath fresh snow. When he came back through the front door, he stopped. There, beside the table, stood Violet. She thought she was alone. In the darkness, she had drawn a rough map with her finger through a layer of dust near the window. A map of Frost Valley, the creek, the church road, the old mine trail, even the North Bridge, places no stranger should know. Her hand froze when she realized he was watching. The room went still. Neither spoke. Then Violet slowly wiped the drawing away, until nothing remained but dust. Ethan looked at her. She looked back. And for the first time since pulling her from the snow, he felt a question settle heavily in his chest. Who exactly had he brought into his home? Outside, the wind moved across Snowcap Ridge. Inside, the woman called Violet Carter stood in silence, carrying secrets she clearly had no intention of sharing. Not yet. The next morning arrived bright and cold. Fresh snow covered the valley from fence line to fence line. The storm had left the world looking clean and untouched. Ethan was already outside before sunrise. That had been his habit for years. Feed the horses, check the water troughs, walk the south pasture. Keep moving. Moving was easier than thinking. When he returned to the house, he expected to find Violet asleep. Instead, smoke drifted from the stovepipe. He stepped inside. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee. Violet stood near the stove wearing one of his spare wool shirts rolled at the sleeves. A kettle simmered quietly. For a second, Ethan simply stopped. No one had been in that kitchen with him for 6 years. No one. "Morning," she said. "Morning." A brief silence followed. She poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. One of them was the blue mug Ethan always used. She placed it exactly where he usually sat. That detail bothered him more than it should have. Not because it was wrong, because it was right. Too right. He sat down slowly. "You feeling better?" "A lot." "You remember much from yesterday?" Violet lowered her eyes to her coffee. "Enough." That was all she offered. Outside, sunlight reflected off the snow so brightly it hurt the eyes. By mid-morning, Ethan headed toward the north fence where several posts had been damaged during the storm. He expected Violet to stay inside. Instead, she appeared carrying a toolbox. The wooden handle was nearly as long as her forearm. You don't have to do that, Ethan said. I know. Yet she kept walking. The fence line stretched across a low ridge overlooking Frost Valley. Wind rattled the dry grass, poking through the snow. Ethan worked quietly, driving staples, replacing wire, checking posts. Half an hour later, he realized Violet was not simply watching. She was helping. Properly helping. She knew how to hold fencing pliers. She knew how to keep tension on wire. She knew how to brace a loose post before he reset it. Most surprising of all, she never got in the way. People unfamiliar with ranch work usually did. Violet didn't. Where'd you learn that? He finally asked. She brushed snow from her gloves, different places. Again. A true answer that revealed almost nothing. The afternoon passed that way. Small tasks, small conversations, long stretches of silence. None of it felt uncomfortable. At least not entirely. Later they checked the horse barn. One of the geldings had thrown a shoe. While Ethan examined the hoof, Violet stood nearby holding the lantern. The horse shifted suddenly. Most people stepped back. Violet didn't. She remained calm. The animal settled almost immediately. Ethan noticed. You've been around horses? A few. The corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. That evening they sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The lamp burned low. Outside, snow slid from the roof in soft thumps. Violet was studying an old ranch ledger. Not reading, studying. Her eyes moved carefully across every line, every number, every date. You're good with books. She looked up. My father believed numbers matter. The answer escaped before she could stop it. For the first time, something crossed her face. Regret. Ethan noticed but said nothing. A person usually revealed more when not pressed. Near midnight, the wind returned. Not a storm, just a strong mountain wind rolling down snow-capped ridge. The barn door rattled. A loose chain struck wood. Clang, clang, clang. Violet woke instantly. Footsteps crossed the upstairs floor. When she came down, she found Ethan already dressed, pulling on his coat. What's wrong? Nothing. The answer came too quickly. Another clang echoed outside. Ethan was through the door before she could say more. Violet stood at the window, watching. The lantern moved across the dark yard, to the barn, then back, then to the corral, checking, always checking, as though he expected to find someone waiting there, or lose someone again. He returned 15 minutes later with snow on his shoulders. Neither mentioned it. The next day, the weather softened. By afternoon, Violet volunteered to help clean the storage shed behind the house. Dust floated through slashes of sunlight. Old tools hung from pegs. Boxes sat stacked against the wall. Most had not been touched in years. Violet worked quietly until she found a small wooden chest hidden beneath a canvas tarp. She paused. The chest was carefully made, polished despite its age. A ribbon remained tied around one handle. Without thinking, she brushed dust away. The lid shifted slightly. At that exact moment, Ethan entered. Everything stopped. The air itself seemed to stop. His eyes landed on the box, then on Violet. For the first time since she arrived, something hardened inside his face. Not anger, something deeper. Pain caught too late. I'm sorry, Violet said immediately. I wasn't looking through it. Ethan walked forward and closed the lid. His movements remained controlled. Almost too controlled. My wife's things. The words landed softly, but the room changed. Violet lowered her hand. I didn't know. No. A long silence followed. Snowmelt dripped steadily outside. Neither looked directly at the other. Finally, Ethan picked up the box, carefully, as if it contained something fragile or unfinished. He carried it toward the house. Violet remained alone in the shed. listening to his footsteps fade. That evening, the kitchen felt quieter than usual. The distance between them had returned. Not large, but noticeable. After supper, Ethan stepped onto the porch. The sky above Frost Valley had turned purple with sunset. Far down the road, near the town boundary, a rider appeared, then another. The two men stopped outside Abigail Turner's boarding house. One of them unfolded a paper. The other pointed toward the valley, toward Broken Creek Ranch, toward his home, toward Violet. Ethan watched for a long moment. A feeling settled heavily in his chest, the feeling that trouble had finally arrived. Inside the house, Violet sat by the lamp with her leather bag resting beside her chair. The silver key remained hidden inside. Outside, strangers had begun asking questions, and somewhere in Frost Valley, someone was searching for a woman carrying a silver key. The next morning arrived under a pale winter sky. The snow along the main road had been packed flat by wagons heading toward town. Thin smoke rose from chimneys across the valley. Ethan needed supplies: flour, lamp oil, a new length of chain for the south gate. Normally he would have gone alone. This time Violet insisted on coming. Neither mentioned the strangers from the night before. Neither mentioned the silver key. The wagon rolled slowly into Frost Valley just before noon. The town sat beneath the shadow of Snowcap Ridge, small and weathered. A feed store stood beside the blacksmith. Across the road sat Abigail Turner's boarding house and general store. Conversations slowed the moment people noticed Ethan. Then they noticed Violet. Eyes followed them. Not openly at first. Just enough. The kind of attention people give when rumors arrive before facts. Ethan tied the wagon outside the store. Violet stepped down carefully. For a brief second, their eyes met. A silent exchange. Stay close. Inside, the store smelled of coffee beans, leather, and wood smoke. Abigail Turner stood behind the counter sorting invoices. She looked up. Her smile faded almost immediately. So that's her. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Several customers looked over. Violet remained still. Abigail folded her arms. We've been hearing stories all week. Ethan picked up a sack of flour. Stories usually grow bigger than the truth. A few people chuckled. Abigail didn't. Depends who's telling them. The room quieted. Violet lowered her gaze to a display of sewing thread near the wall. She did not argue, did not defend herself. That somehow made the room feel even more uncomfortable. A ranch hand near the stove shifted in his chair. A woman gathering supplies suddenly found something very interesting on the floor. Nobody wanted to be the first to say what everyone was thinking. Then the front door opened. Cold air rushed inside. Two men entered. One of them wore a dark overcoat despite the weather. Expensive boots. Expensive watch chain. The kind of man who measured land before he measured people. Nathan Doyle. The room changed immediately. Abigail straightened. Several townspeople nodded respectfully. Nathan removed his gloves. His eyes landed on Violet. There was no surprise in them, only recognition. Violet's hand tightened around the edge of a shelf. Ethan noticed. Nathan smiled. Not warmly. Miss Carter. Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The name seemed to settle over the room like dust. Violet looked directly at him. I don't know you. Nathan's smile widened slightly. That's unfortunate. I know quite a lot about you. Ethan stepped forward. Not aggressively. Just enough. Nathan shifted his attention. You must be Ethan Brooks. I am. I hear you've been providing shelter. Ethan said nothing. Nathan reached inside his coat and removed a folded telegram. The paper crackled as he opened it. I came here on behalf of Silver Crown Mining Company. Several people exchanged looks. Everyone in Wyoming Territory had heard of Silver Crown. Nathan continued. We are searching for a missing individual who disappeared with company property. The room became very still. Then he turned the telegram outward. The name is Violet Carter. A murmur spread through the store. Abigail's eyes widened. Someone near the stove whispered. Violet stood motionless. Nathan folded the paper. Theft of legal documents. Theft of company property. Fraud. The words landed one after another. Heavy, deliberate. Sheriff Walter Hayes entered through the rear office at almost the same moment. His expression tightened. Nathan. Sheriff. Walter accepted the telegram and read silently. When he looked up, his face revealed nothing. That worried Ethan more than anger would have. The sheriff turned toward Violet. Is there anything you'd like to tell me? Violet opened her mouth, then closed it. The hesitation lasted only a second. Long enough. The room noticed. Nathan noticed. Sheriff Hayes noticed. Ethan noticed. The silence became its own answer. Outside, wind rattled the storefront windows. Nathan slipped his gloves back on. I'll be staying in town. Then he looked directly at Violet. One way or another, this matter will be settled. He left. The door shut behind him. The store remained quiet long after he was gone. Sheriff Hayes folded the telegram. I don't know what's true yet. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a defense. It was worse. Uncertainty. Then he looked at Ethan. You should be careful. When the sheriff left, several customers followed. Within minutes, half the store had emptied. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted questions. Only Ethan and Violet remained near the counter. Abigail avoided looking directly at her now. That somehow hurt more than before. The ride home passed in silence. The wagon wheels creaked through packed snow. A hawk circled high above the valley. Neither spoke. Neither seemed able to find the right words. Late that afternoon, Sheriff Hayes arrived at Broken Creek Ranch. His horse stood steaming in the cold air. Ethan met him at the gate. Violet remained on the porch. The sheriff removed his hat. I came because I owe you both honesty. Ethan waited. Walter glanced toward the house. Right now I have questions. Nothing more. Then he lowered his voice. But if Doyle is lying, I'll find that out too. It wasn't trust, but it wasn't condemnation. Not yet. As evening settled over the ranch, the sheriff rode away. The sky turned dark blue. The temperature dropped again. Inside the house, supper sat untouched. The lamp flickered quietly. Violet finally stood. I should leave. Ethan looked up, no. He's here because of me. She gathered her coat from the hook. If I stay, this gets worse. Outside, darkness pressed against the windows. Inside, neither moved. For a long moment. Then Ethan spoke, calmly, firmly. The people in town can think what they want. Violet looked at him. He met her eyes without hesitation. The same eyes that had watched over a lonely ranch for 6 years. The same eyes that had ridden through a blizzard to save a stranger. You are here under my protection. The words hung in the room. Simple, certain. Nothing else followed. No promises. No declarations. Just truth. Much later that night, after Ethan had gone upstairs, Violet stood alone beside the kitchen table. Moonlight slipped through the window. The leather bag rested near the chair. The silver key remained hidden inside. Slowly, she packed her few belongings. One dress, one brush, one photograph, one key. She slipped quietly toward the barn. The horse saddle was already waiting. If she left before dawn, Nathan Doyle would follow her instead of Ethan. That was the plan. at least until a familiar voice reached her from the darkness. Going somewhere? Violet froze. Ethan stood beside the barn door. Snow drifted softly between them. Neither spoke. And for the first time since arriving at Broken Creek Ranch, there was no place left to hide from the truth that was finally catching up to both of them. Snow drifted quietly between the barn and the corral fence. Violet's horse stood saddled. Her leather bag hung from the saddle horn. The silver key was inside. Ethan looked at the packed belongings, then at her. You were going to leave. It wasn't a question. Violet lowered her eyes. If I stay, Nathan Doyle stays. The wind moved through the cottonwoods near the creek. A loose chain tapped softly against the barn wall. Ethan stepped closer. And if you leave? He follows me. You don't know that. I do. For a long moment, neither moved. The moonlight lay across the snow like pale glass. Finally, Ethan exhaled. Then tell me. Violet looked away toward the dark outline of Snowcap Ridge. For days, she had hidden behind half answers, careful words, silence. Now there was nowhere left to go. They returned to the house. The kitchen lamp burned low. A coffee pot sat near the stove, still warm from supper. Ethan poured 2 cups. Neither touched them. Violet wrapped both hands around the mug anyway, as if gathering courage from the heat. My father owned Silver Crown Mining Company. The words settled into the room. Ethan said nothing. He wasn't supposed to have children. Her gaze drifted toward the window. But he did. Outside, snow slipped from the roof. Soft, heavy. He kept us hidden. My mother and me. She swallowed. When I was 19, he promised everything would change. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Then he died. The silence afterward felt larger than the room itself. Nathan Doyle took control. Ethan listened. He claimed there was no heir. And there was? Violet met his eyes. Me. For the first time since she'd arrived, Ethan saw fear instead of caution. Real fear. Not fear of being discovered. Fear of not being believed. The company records disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. People were paid. She reached into the leather bag. The silver key appeared in her hand. The lamplight caught its worn edges. This opens a safe. Ethan looked at the engraved number. 17. My father kept the original will there. Where? Violet hesitated, then answered. Silver Crown Mine. The old mine sat abandoned beyond the northern ridge. Everyone in Frost Valley knew the place. Nobody visited it anymore. A cold wind rattled the windows. Ethan leaned back slowly. The pieces were beginning to fit. The photograph, the torn document, the men searching for her. Nathan Doyle. Everything. After a long pause, he spoke. Why didn't you tell me? Violet looked down. Because people stop seeing you once money enters the room. Ethan stared into his coffee. The answer felt honest. Painfully honest. A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth. You should have given me more credit than that. For the first time in days, Violet smiled too, only briefly. But it was there. Then the smile disappeared. There's something else. Ethan waited. Her eyes moved toward the stove, toward the fire, toward anything except him. I know what it's like to lose someone. He understood immediately, not because of the words, because of how she said them, slowly, carefully, like handling something fragile. My mother died 3 winters ago. The room grew quiet again. I spent years running after answers afterward. She looked at him. And now I'm tired. Ethan lowered his gaze. His thumb rubbed the edge of the coffee mug. Finally, he spoke. My wife died in a blizzard. Violet didn't move, didn't interrupt. 6 years of silence seemed to gather in the room. It happened less than 5 miles from here. The words came slowly. I was late getting home. The clock on the wall ticked softly. I thought she'd wait. His jaw tightened, but she came looking for me. Outside, the wind faded. The entire valley seemed to listen. I found the wagon the next morning. He stopped there. No details. None were needed. Violet understood. The silence afterward carried more weight than any explanation. Ethan looked toward the window. Snow reflected moonlight across the glass. Ever since then, every storm sounds the same. Violet's eyes softened. Now she understood the midnight checks, the barn, the fences, the sleepless nights. Neither reached for the other. Neither offered easy comfort. They simply sat together, two people carrying different griefs, the same loneliness. Hours seemed to pass. Then a knock echoed from the front door. 3 slow knocks. Ethan stood immediately. Nobody visited Broken Creek Ranch at this hour. He opened the door. Cold air swept inside. Reverend Samuel Grant stood beneath the porch lantern. Snow dusted the shoulders of his black coat. The elderly minister looked tired and troubled. I need to speak with Miss Carter. A few minutes later, all 3 sat around the kitchen table. The Reverend removed his gloves carefully. Then his eyes settled on the old photograph lying beside the silver key. His face changed instantly. Color drained from it. He reached toward the picture, with trembling fingers. Where did you get this? Violet exchanged a glance with Ethan. It belonged to my father. The Reverend closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they shone with memory. I know this photograph. The room became very still. The old minister turned the picture over. His thumb rested on a faded corner. Then he looked directly at Violet. I was there the day this was taken. Violet froze. The clock stopped mattering. The fire stopped mattering. Everything stopped. Reverend Grant leaned forward. I baptized a little girl shortly afterward. His voice softened. A little girl named Violet Carter. No one spoke. The minister's eyes filled with certainty. I remember your mother. Violet's breath caught. I remember your father. Tears gathered instantly in her eyes. Not from sadness, from recognition, from finally being seen. The Reverend nodded once, slowly, firmly. You are exactly who you say you are. The room fell silent. Outside, somewhere beyond the dark hills, Silver Crown Mine waited beneath years of snow and dust. And inside that forgotten mine sat a safe that could change everything. But they were no longer the only ones moving toward it. Miles away, in a room above Abigail Turner's boarding house, Nathan Doyle stood beside a map spread across a table. Hank Morrison stood opposite him. The girl knows where it is, Hank said. Nathan folded the map. His expression remained calm. Cold. Then we leave at first light. Back at Broken Creek Ranch, the fire burned low. The silver key rested beside the photograph. And for the first time since the blizzard, Ethan and Violet understood that the road ahead would lead them to the same place. Silver Crown Mine, and the truth waiting inside it. As the fire burned low at Broken Creek Ranch, and the Wyoming wind moved softly across the snow-covered valley, neither Ethan nor Violet could see exactly what tomorrow would bring. They only knew that some roads cannot be avoided forever. Some truths wait patiently, no matter how far we travel to escape them. And maybe that's what makes this story feel so familiar. Because if you place yourself in Ethan's boots for a moment, you can understand the fear of opening your heart after loss. If you stand where Violet stood, carrying a burden no one else can see. You can understand how exhausting it is to keep running, hoping someday you'll find a place where you don't have to explain yourself. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't being rescued from a storm. Sometimes it's finding someone willing to stay after the storm has passed. The older I get, the more I believe healing rarely arrives all at once. It comes through small things. A chair left open at a table, a lantern glowing in a window, a person who chooses not to walk away when the truth becomes difficult. If this story brought someone to mind, or if you've ever been given a second chance you didn't expect, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you'd like to spend more evenings beside campfires, lonely ranch roads, hidden mysteries, and stories about people finding hope where they least expected it, you're warmly invited to join us again for the next journey. There are still many trails ahead, and some of the most memorable stories are waiting just beyond the next ridge.